Hello and welcome back to our podcast. This is your friend, Dr. James. We are diving deep today into one of the most fundamental questions in all of theology and really in our spiritual lives. What is faith? Before we jump in, I want to give credit where it is due. The material we are covering today, the definitions, the exegesis, and the illustrations, comes directly from the lectures of Dr. Ken Wilson. I'll be walking you through his work, and I want to acknowledge him right up front. If you hear me share an illustration or a specific argument today, please know this is coming from Dr. Wilson's extensive research. So, let's get into it. As we touched on in the introduction, there is a massive divide in how people understand faith. What is it? What does it actually entail? That is going to be our topic for the next few sessions. Now, as we've seen, there is a very common view out there that faith is a gift of God. You see this in Calvinism, you see it in Roman Catholicism, and historically, this all traces back to Augustine, which is a rabbit hole we will go down a little later. But the core of this gift view is that God unilaterally bestows faith on the elect. The idea is that God does this after He regenerates a person because, according to this view, a human being is incapable of faith on their own. They believe we are so depraved, in such a mean state, that there is no way a human could simply believe. Now, that view relies entirely on the assumption of the loss of free choice. But as Dr. Wilson points out, and we'll learn more about this later, no Christian in any position of authority actually believed that until Augustine. Augustine had his reasons for teaching it later in his life, but in his early life, he believed what traditional Christianity had always taught. So that's view number one. Faith is a gift. It's not something we do. God gives it to us, and then we believe. Then there is the alternative view, which is what Dr. Wilson and the Grace School of Theology teach. And that is, faith is a human response. This view holds that yes, we are all corrupted by Adam's fall, but we still retain the capacity to believe. When God invites you or me, when we hear the good news of Jesus Christ, we have a residual capacity to say yes. This depends on the idea that we retained free choice. When humanity fell with Adam, we didn't lose the ability to make moral decisions. Can we make them perfectly? No, but we can still make them. So, if faith is a response, what exactly is it? Let's look at a historical definition first. Thomas Aquinas. He was a very famous Catholic theologian. His Summa Theologica is massive, respected by Catholics, and Protestants should take note of it too. Aquinas said this: faith is the act of the intellect when it assents to divine truth under the influence of the will moved by God through grace. It sounds fancy, but do we agree with that? Dr. Wilson says no. Here's why. First, Aquinas calls faith an act. But faith isn't an act. It's not a work, it's a response. Second, he talks about being under the influence of the will moved by God. We have to question that. Does God have to mystically come in and move the will before we can believe? We believe it's all by grace, absolutely. But does God have to literally toggle a switch in every individual heart just to make belief possible? We're going to challenge that and say, we don't think that is a biblical concept. So if it's not that, what is it? Here is Dr. Wilson's definition, which he synthesized from Hebrews 11 and other scriptures. I want you to listen closely to this. Faith is being convinced that something is true without definitive proof, but with sufficient evidence to be convinced. That's the definition. Now let's break that down because every word there matters. First, notice the phrase being convinced. That is passive. It is not an act. It is not a work. If I am convinced of something, that happens in the mind. It's internal. You cannot force me to believe something. You can twist my arm. You can force me to do something. You can force me to work. But you can't force me to believe. I either believe it or I don't. I'm convinced or I'm not. So faith is passive. Second, faith has to be without definitive proof. What does Dr. Wilson mean by that? Well, think about math. I don't have faith that 2 plus 2 equals 4. If I take two objects and two more objects, I don't believe it's 4. I know it's 4. I have definitive proof. I have direct vision. I have hands-on experience. That isn't faith, that's sight, that's knowledge. As scripture says, faith is for things unseen. If you see it, it's not faith. But, and this is the third part, faith requires sufficient evidence. Here is a classic illustration from Dr. Wilson. What if I told you that I believe Martians landed yesterday, abducted me, and dropped me back just in time to record this podcast? You're going to ask, where is the evidence? And if I say, oh, I don't have any, it's just what I believe, you would look at me like I was mentally unstable, right? Without evidence, that isn't faith. It's fantasy. It's folly. It's fiction. So true faith needs three things. 1, it's being convinced, passive. 2, no definitive proof, because that rules out faith. 3, sufficient evidence. That is why Jesus performed miracles, to provide the evidence so people would believe he was God in the flesh. Now, let's circle back to this idea of faith as a gift. It is a very common concept. Even many evangelicals believe it. But Dr. Wilson points out a huge problem. No Bible verse ever states that faith is a gift. That is a theological assumption based on Augustine around 412 AD. Think about it. Unbelievers exercise faith every single day. They have faith the sun will rise. They don't have definitive proof, but they have good evidence. They have faith a chair will hold them up. Faith isn't restricted to Christians. It's something humans do day in and day out. Furthermore, faith is not meritorious. Augustine made this error of thinking that if we generate faith, we are earning something. Not at all. Faith is just the means God designed for us to accept eternal life. We don't get bonus points for it. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Wait, what about Ephesians 2:8-9? Let's read it. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. People point to that and say, see, faith is the gift. But there is a major grammatical problem there. In the Greek, the word for faith, pistis, is feminine. The word for gift, doron, is neuter. They are apples and oranges. Grammatically, faith cannot be the antecedent of gift. It won't work. Dr. Wallace, in his Greek grammar, Beyond the Basics, explains that the gift refers to the whole package. The gift is the fact that you have been saved by grace through faith. Now, some people try to argue, well, if salvation is the gift and faith is a part of salvation, then faith must be a gift too. They try to bundle every individual part into the gift. Dr. Wilson uses a great illustration here. He speaks as a medical doctor. Imagine you have a deadly disease like Ebola. The doctor says, I am going to save your life. He draws up a vaccination, puts the needle in your arm, and injects the serum. He gives this to you as a gift. He doesn't charge you. Now, what is the gift? The gift is your salvation from the disease through the injection. You don't get to keep the doctor. You don't get to keep the syringe or the needle. Those are the mechanisms. The gift is the salvation. It's the same in Ephesians 2. You can't break it down and say every nut and bolt is the gift. That is grasping at straws to support a theology that the text doesn't actually say. There is only one other place in the New Testament where faith and gift appear together, and that is Romans 12:6. Paul writes, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. Earlier in verse 3, he says, God has dealt to each one a measure of faith. But look at the context. Paul is talking to Christians. These are people who have already believed. This is not about initial salvation. This is about spiritual gifts for ministry. God divides up these gifts so that no one can boast. I can't boast about my gift, and you can't boast about yours because God allotted them. This has nothing to do with the initial faith to be saved. So, both key verses used to argue faith is a gift actually fail when you look at the grammar and the context. We also need to be clear that faith is not a work. Augustine tried to argue that if faith is something we do, it's a work, and therefore it earns merit. But look at Romans 4:1-8. Paul explicitly divides faith from works. He says they are two completely separate things. Theologians will try to dodge this by saying, oh, Paul meant works of the law. But Dr. Wilson reminds us who is the example in Romans 4? Abraham. Abraham lived before the law. Paul isn't talking about Jewish law, he is talking about works in general. Think about receiving a gift. If I hand you a book and say, "This is yours," and you reach out your hand to take it, is that a meritorious work? Did you earn the book by reaching out your hand? Of course not. Simply receiving a gift cannot be meritorious. Before we wrap up today, let's talk about the words themselves. In Greek, the word is pistis. It is translated as faith, belief, and trust. You will hear people try to separate these. They'll say, "You have belief, but do you have trust?" Or they'll say, "We need faith to believe." Dr. Wilson points out that's a tautology. It's meaningless repetition. It's like saying, "I believe to believe." Don't let people play word games with you. Faith, belief, and trust are all the same Greek word. Also, be very careful of the idea that faith means obey. There is a very influential theological dictionary that tries to slip this in. It argues that because trust implies satisfying a demand, it therefore means to obey. Dr. Wilson calls this a root fallacy. It's slipping in a theological bias that isn't in the text. And finally, does faith have to be continuous to be real? You'll hear people say, "If you don't keep believing, you never really believed." Dr. Wilson points us to the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament. Look at Moses and Aaron in Numbers 20. God explicitly tells them, "You did not believe me." They stopped believing in that moment. Did they lose their standing as God's people? No. Did they go to hell? No. Moses shows up later on the Mount of Transfiguration, but they did fail to persevere in faith in that moment. So the idea that true faith always perseveres is erroneous. We also see this debate regarding prepositions. Scholars will tell you that in the Gospel of John, only the phrase "believe into Jesus," pisteuo eis, is saving faith. They'll say if you just believe him or believe that, it's not enough. Dr. Wilson says this is nonsense. If you look at the Greek, John uses all sorts of prepositions, eis, en, hoti, epi. He uses them interchangeably. Whenever John combines believe with a preposition regarding Jesus, it is salvific. This error, that you must believe into him rather than just believe him, goes back to Augustine again. He was reading a bad Latin translation and didn't know the Greek well enough to see that John 20:31 contradicts him. We've covered a lot of ground today. To recap: 1. Faith is a response, not a unilateral gift. 2. Faith is being convinced based on evidence, not definitive proof. 3. Faith is not a work and it is not meritorious. 4. And linguistically, faith, belief, and trust are the same thing. Next time, we are going to pick up right where we left off. We mentioned that some people think believing that isn't enough because even the demons believe. Well, we are going to tackle the faith of demons and other aspects in our next session. You won't want to miss that. If you like this video, please subscribe, like, and share. Till next time, thanks for listening. God bless.